Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I didn't know I lived such an unusual life. I had a regular job, went back from it afterwards, and spent my evenings on the sofa in front of the television or texting on my phone like everyone else. My flat was in one of those old flats with paper-thin walls and squeaky floorboards, but it was home. My neighbors were very reserved, shy people. That all ended with the entry of the fellow who was in 3B. I remember I first saw him. In the elevator, a piece of cardboard board to use as a box, just standing there and looking out at the blinding floor numbers. This old man, perhaps in his 50s, had furrowed, creased wrinkles at the corner of his eyes and this kind of dirty look as if he didn't sleep in years. Almost didn't even look up when I was walking by. Just nodded. In a matter of seconds, things started to go wrong. Little things at first. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear scratching, soft but insistent. Not mice or anything, that was deliberate fingernail tapping on the wall business. I just figured that it was the rickety old pipes giving me trouble. Then there was the knocking. It was always 2 a.m. Soft, persistent knocking on my front door. When I peered through the peephole, no one. I even opened it a couple of times in hopes of getting some stupid drunk neighbor who was being silly, but the vacant hallway would be glaring back in my face. Just nothing. I tried to brush it off, but every night it worsened. The knocking turned into pounding. It sounded like someone shut the door with two hands. It would shake through my apartment, making the walls rattle, but once I went ahead to turn the handle, nothing. No scratching noises, no withdrawal motions, nothing at all. I just kept telling myself that it was a joke. Some other student on some other level of the building pulling a prank on me. But then I started to see other things. I did see him once standing before his door, 3B. It was 3 a.m. He wasn't leaving, just stood there gazing at the wall and talking to himself. His voice was too low to actually hear what he was saying, though his fists were tightly clenched. He stood there for hours. The next morning I spotted him staring at me through his peephole when I was leaving for work. Didn't even attempt to cover. Stood there with door wide open, his bloodshot eyes directly staring into mine. And then out of nowhere, things started going south. I awoke one evening at the turn of my lock. It was not nice, but I could hear it. Someone trying to get in. My heart almost shattered. I clutched whatever heavy object I could find my hands on, an old lamp, and stood ready. The handle turned and then nothing came. I didn't sleep much after that. I started barricading the door, stacking chairs against it. I knew it was useless to call the police. What would I say? Hey, my weird neighbor is on my door at 2 a.m. They'd be laughing at me over the phone. But he broke in one night. I woke up to breathing, not my own, another's, labored and raspy, beside me. I didn't budge. I could sense it, something lingering around my bedside. I attempted to scream, reach for my phone, but my body was in rebellion. It would not obey me like I was instructing it to, and the whispering started. It was placed in my ear. Sentences I never heard, some of them sounding like my name. My body charged, and I leaped up, wildly hashing the lamp. The light was on, and I saw him. 3B, standing there smiling, his face too wide, eyes too wide, pupils too large. He leaned his head to the side, looking at me as at a guinea pig. And then, quicker than he had appeared, he was no longer there. The door was still locked. The next morning, early, I started to pack my things. I didn't care about losing lease, didn't care about losing my deposit. I just needed to get out. I explained the whole thing to him, to the landlord. He took a deep breath, shaking his head. "You're not the first," he told me. 3B, that apartment has been empty for years. I came home from the apartment that night. I have no idea what I saw. Maybe I dreamt it, maybe I didn't. What I do know is there are nights if I close my eyes I can still hear the whisper. And I never ever opened my door past 2 a.m. Even after I had left, though, something wasn't right. I had looked forward to being glad to be free of that building, but the sensation never actually went away. My new flat was in the other part of town, a relaxed district where nothing ever appeared to take place. And still, however, at night I couldn't help holding my breath for the sounds that were not there. A week or so passed. No thudding on the door. No cursing. I was questioning whether I was just annoyed. That is, until I got a letter. No mailing address to send it back from. My name in trembly, shaky script. I opened it with caution. Within, 1 sheet of paper and 4 words of wobbly writing. You never really left. I lay awake the whole night until someone, apparently callously, rattled the door. 2 a.m., slow, steady, right on my door. I took a breath and screwed up my eyes as much as I could. Just my imagination. No way. Knock, knock, knock. I sprang out of bed and tiptoed over to the peephole, hardly daring to draw breath. The opposite side of the hall was dark. Far too dark. As if lights had been snuffed out throughout the building so that everything would be dark. But I know what I see. Someone. Standing directly in front of my door. No face, no movement. Standing. I knew. I gripped my phone, shaking hands trying to dial 911, but before I could actually call, the phone screen flickered on, then went out. The battery had been 80% when I slept. The pounding became deafening. I spun and fled, racing heart. The air within the apartment was heavy, heavy on my skin. And then the whisper. Not on the door, but within the apartment. Behind me. I wheeled round, but nothing. The front room, which was moonlit and empty. The whispering suddenly exploded into a gravelly, meaningless bellow. I leaned against the wall, wheezing faintly. And then, the closet creaked open. I lost not a second. I grabbed my keys and left, running down the hallway by the man who was standing outside my door. I did not look at it. I did not want to see his face. I ran until I was out on the street, gasping. The street was empty, the world asleep. I looked back over the building, half wishing to see him, 3B, at my living room window. My window had been black as coal. I never went back for my things. I left the city the next morning on the first bus, but even now I can sense it. The stench of blind eyes drawing in darkness. Because it doesn't matter where I am. I know what happened. I never left. I never even noticed the neighbors. Strangers went by, new faces moved in, and I never did my best good enough to even make a try at striking up conversation with them. I lived on a pretty suburban street, the kind of area where the most thrilling thing that ever did happen was the occasional sale in the backyard. My apartment was old, somewhat worn out, but it was comfortable. And thus, then he came and rented the house on my side. He was fine at first, middle-aged, quiet, made no trouble. He preferred to sit on his porch late in the evening, just sitting there. I had first thought that he was just sitting there outside enjoying the clean air, but something about him sitting there, not moving, looking out into the darkness gave me the hair standing up on the back of my neck. I dissuaded myself out of having dreams. Perhaps he was alone. Then, however, the things began getting peculiar. One evening I woke to the scrape of fingernails on wood beyond my bedroom window. I had my blinds drawn, yet I could detect the slightest stir of shadow upon the other side. My heart thumping, I picked up the baseball bat beside the bed. The following morning, I awoke to scratch marks on the wood beside my window. Serrated, deep marks that hadn't been there before. I tried to sweep it under the rug. Maybe it was an animal. But in the depths of my heart, I knew better. A couple nights later, I returned home from work late. I pulled up into my driveway and saw him standing in front of his house, just looking at my house. No cigarette, no phone, no reason he would be there, just looking. I did not get out of my car immediately. I just sat there faking looking at my phone in hopes that he would go into his house. He did not. He just stood there, still. When I finally gathered enough courage to get going, the minute I closed the door on my car, he pulled back out and went into his house. No glance over his shoulder, no hesitation. Just vanished. I attempted to rationalize that he was odd, perhaps socially awkward. Then events happened quickly. I was stirred one night by the sound of my front doorknob jiggling. Not the wind whipping the wind, but somebody attempting to turn it, operating it. I leapt up, my heart pounding, and seized my bat. I reached the door, every instinct telling me to run. I looked through the peephole, hoping against hope to see a drunken neighbor or passing child. Nothing. And then I saw out of the corner of my eye. I turned and presented my back to my living room window, and there he was, standing on my front porch, inches from the window, looking in. I crept back, gasping. He didn't blink, didn't even twitch, just stood there and stared at me. I did the one thing that I could possibly do. I turned on every light in my house. The instant my living room was illuminated, he stepped back, once more, and then turned and went into his house as if nothing had ever occurred. I did not sleep that night. I returned to the police the following day. They listened to me, nodded, prepared their report, but did nothing. Unless he actually enters the house or injures someone, there is nothing we can do, they explained. So I invested in cameras, many of them. I put them above my doors, windows, any and every location where it could possibly work. The second night, I sat in the dark, viewing the live stream from my phone. At 2:37 a.m., he showed up. He came out of his front door and stood in the center of the street, staring right at mine. Then he began walking, steady, purposeful movements. He did not appear at my door today. Rather, he moved around the back of my house, vanishing and appearing from view. And then he stood at my bedroom window. He was there for a long, long time. I was able to study his face on the old black and white video. He had on a smile. Not a real smile, a big one, too stiff, as if his face still had not mastered making the smile. And then he did something, and I got the goosebumps. He took out something shiny from his pocket, a key. I sat up in bed, closing my bedroom door behind me, dizzy. How did he get in? Had he come too early? While I was on the job? While I slept? I have my phone held in the crook of my arm to dial the police when I heard it, the familiar groan of my front door opening. I did not pause. I ran to my closet, pushing myself inside, trying to stifle my breathing. The door creaked open. I stood waiting for his footsteps, slow and awkward, the sound of him moving around my house. Then nothing. I huddled there for what seemed like hours. At last, I heard the door shut. I stood, frozen, listening, until the sun crept over my window. When I finally ventured outside, my front door was shut. Nothing was taken, nothing was touched, except one thing. There was a lone, solitary note on my kitchen counter, a piece of paper with 2 words in trembling handwriting, "Not yet." I returned home that night. I figured leaving town would stop it. I cleaned as much as I could, left most of my furniture behind, and drove halfway across the state. I rented a new apartment, smaller, older, but deadbolts, security bars, and I never left one window open at night. The first weeks I kept the knife beside me, waking every time at each creak. But nothing. The nightmares disappeared, my nerves calmed. I reassured myself that it was finished. Then, 3 months later, I received a package by mail. No address. Just my name written in the same trembling handwriting. I was about to not open it. My hands shook while unwrapping the brown wrapping paper. There was nothing inside but one thing. A solitary key. And on that, a note with 2 other words. Still waiting. I put in additional locks, changed addresses, changed phone numbers, but it kept coming. Now and then, every few months or so, another package, another key, another note. And one evening, I awoke at the sound that hadn't occurred in years, the creak of my front door. I was no longer alone this time. I had something. My hands shook as I held the gun against the door. It creaked open. A man stepped in. I fired. The light switched on. It wasn't him. It was a cop. The neighbors spotted a prowler. They'd opened my door, crossed over to check if all was not well, but never caught him. And the last note I ever got? Not a key this time, just a picture of me, sleeping, from within my own bedchamber. I have no idea why my parents believed that it was such a great idea to leave me completely on my own at the weekend. I was 16 years old, still technically a child in everyone's mind, but I suppose that they believed that I was mature enough to fend for myself for a couple of days. They went on an out-of-town day trip and left me at home alone in a house full of snacks, TV, and no one to remind me when it was time for bed. I loved it. For the first time in my life, the whole house was mine. The early afternoon was bliss. I had listened to some music, raided the fridge for snacks, and I laid on the couch munching potato chip bag after potato chip bag. Truthfully, I was queen for a day. The house was massive. The house is too big for one person, actually, but I had the house to myself for 2 whole days. No rules, no annoying little brother, just me and quiet. And that was nice. I caught myself half-seriously entertaining the thought, what's the worst that can happen? The moment the dark started to fall, I started to be a bit tight. Not too much of anything, but the presence. You have the type when you are in your own house by yourself and quiet makes everything sound too loud. I felt that it was because the house really wasn't small by any measure and nobody else was there. Floorboards groaned. Wind never stopped moaning. I wasn't accustomed to it. I got up and headed to the kitchen to get more snacks. The lighting was dim, just enough to have everything sort of relatively off. But I was like, whatever, I'm just tripping myself out. So I headed back and got some candy and returned to the living room. The whole house changed at night. The darkness was bigger than it needed to be, and the silence was only keeping itself just so as to be leaning on, pressing in on me. But I didn't want to have been paranoid. So I watched a movie, kept the volume as low as I could, and attempted to push that feeling away. It was while I stood around that I heard it. A knock at the front door. I stood still. I know. It could have been a million things. The wind, perhaps? No, it didn't work like that. This was a knock. A single, clear knock. I attempted to brush it off, thinking that it had to be one of the neighbors just being pesky. It did not sound quite right to me, though. I was not in the mood for company coming over, and in good conscience, nobody ever drops by unless you are inviting them. I just sat by the door, scowling at the door for 1 minute, not wishing to be paranoid. The knock once more. Louder this time, and that's when hair on back of my neck rose up. I don't know why I did anything, but I went over to door. I wasn't going to open it. I wasn't crazy. But I had to at least peek through peephole, right? So I crept on over and cupped eye up to it. Nothing. Just front yard. Dark. Empty. I wasn't kidding. I swear I really did feel stupid. I must have looked stupid myself standing there looking through the door, but that feeling never went away. I just stood there another minute or two, wondering if I should call my parents or even the police, but seriously, I was just paranoid. Right, but nevertheless, it was too dangerous to open it. So I drew back and retreated into the living room, turning on the TV a little louder in a half-hearted effort at diversion. But then, I heard it again. Upstairs. Soft, but clear. A creaking door opening. Slowly. Then footsteps. Barely audible, but there. My chest was pounding with racing heart. No way. No one was home but me. My parents were the ones with the keys. I knew it, but I didn't wonder about it. I was being alerted to creaking footsteps shambling back and forth across the hardwood floor above. They were shambling slowly, not even bothering to attempt to sneak around, really. But then again, they kind of sounded like they were even attempting to sneak around. But I was hearing them as loud as day. I had reached for my phone, prepared to call my parents' number, but then I glanced at the screen and noticed something was amiss. The time. It was only a little past 10 p.m., but the house was still on, at least in part of the house. The kitchen was on. The hallway was on. I hadn't turned them on. I spoke to myself, telling myself to relax. Perhaps I had flipped on the lights and forgotten. Of course, that is most likely what occurred. Then, the footsteps, closer now, down the hall toward the stairs. That was when I made up my mind. I was not going to just sit and wait and observe to see whether someone was teasing me or not. I picked up a baseball bat under the closet at the stairs, and I creeped down the stairs alone. The house was still. I scarcely heard myself breathe. The footsteps had stopped, and for a moment I thought perhaps my head was playing tricks on me. And then I heard it, a muffled, hysterical scramble, as if someone had just slipped just out of reach. I gritted. I saw out of the corner of my eye something moving. Something. Tall. I wasn't going up. I wasn't venturing out to see what was causing all the commotion. So I turned and ran for the back door. I didn't even consider grabbing my keys or anything. I just needed to get out. But the door wouldn't open. It was stuck, like someone had locked it from the outside. I gave the handle a tug, but nothing was operating. And then I heard something. A voice. It was gentle, barely a whisper at all, but it was unmistakable. "Let me in." I whirled, but there was no one standing there. I was going insane. But then out of the corner of my eye, I caught something. A presence down the hall, just out of sight. I was not going to just sit there and let whatever this thing was advance any further. So I picked up my phone and went downstairs into the basement and locked the door. I attempted to call my parents, but it would not place a call. It was cold, colder than it typically was in the basement. I could see my own breathing. I was trembling. What in the world was happening? I stayed there, hearing in the dark. I didn't hear anything for a while. Nothing at all, just the quiet creeping in around me. But then I was sitting there and a shiver ran down my back. I wasn't alone. I would have believed home alone was the best. Room alone, freedom, and do whatever the heck I wanted to do without someone checking up on me. Friday night was another comfortable night to rest and sleep, without knowing that it would end up being a night horror that I did not need. It began when my parents left town for the weekend. The ritual, see you close all the doors, come back on time, and don't you forget, no party, yada yada. I just said goodbye with a wave, left keys on the kitchen table, and savored quiet and peace alone. I had been crying for quiet and peace. Early morning was quiet, as if it reached the point of no storm. I listened to music, warmed up food, and swiped on social media, pretty much just messing around with small things. Outside weather is different. It was those nights when the wind blew so hard that it actually sounded like they were knocking on your door from the outside. I did not care. I bundled myself up, I got a blanket, and slept through a movie. But that was when it first actually began to feel strange. Something so minor, just this sense of not being level. I tried just to write it off, blamed it on the wind, maybe the house settling, but it didn't go away. I double-checked as I closed the front door. No anything unusual. An hour passed, though, and the electricity did flash out. Twice. And then it was out. Blacker than coal. I got up and grabbed my phone and turned on my flashlight, figuring it was some sort of temporary glitch. But then there was a knock. Not on the front door, but the back door. My stomach dropped. The back door had never been knocked on before. At least not by people we know anyway. I switched off the light, got down on my knees and waited. It returned. A knock, 1, 2, 3, slow and deliberate, and nothing more. Wind blew again, but louder even than that, and made everything 10 times more wretched. I gripped a kitchen knife and moved cautiously towards the back door. I didn't spot anyone at the window, but something was not right. Hair stood up at the back of my neck. I knew it then. An uneasy, cold sensation. No one needed to be climbing to the screaming wail and pounding on the door, the trees creaking, so it was kind of just a little bit scared. I didn't think, though. I wasn't one of those type of people that got freaked out if they heard something strange. My own house creaked and screeched just like any old creepy haunted house would. It was around 11 p.m. and I was getting myself cozy to watch a couple of episodes of some random TV show that they had on Netflix. I was getting myself cozy when I heard the front door creaking for the first time, and I thought that it would be the wind playing tricks on me. And then this eerie feeling came over me when I knew that something. The door half open, and my parents began locking doors, mainly because of burglars caught lurking in the neighborhood. I went over to check, assuming that I must have just left it open previously, but as I went toward the door, my heart sank. No storm. Wind blown wide open. The door wasn't half a crack open, the door was wide open for someone to just walk on in. I was ready to act. I could feel something shut away inside me. I locked it twice, no problem. But the door, sure as hell, had been opened. I didn't know what to do with it. Some corner of my mind convinced itself into the reasonableness of it just simply having to have been opened by accident. Maybe the wind had gotten it open a crack, but the nasty in my stomach had other ideas. I locked it, relocked it, and promised I would lock myself in my bedroom each evening. I tried to ignore it. It's paranoia, I was thinking to myself, and then it started to knock. I had been so certain at first. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe there was an open, creaky window. But no, there they were once more. 3 slow, deliberate raps on my bedroom door. I held my breath. Who in the world could be knocking on my door at that exact time? I lived in a quiet neighborhood and no one ever came to see me at odd hours. My heart started racing. I was present, out of breath, and tried to hear to see if there was something else making the noise. Maybe it was a body against the wall? No, knocking continued. 3 more knocks. It wasn't loud enough to be scary, but it was persistent and heard. I hugged my phone, cold hands, and texted my parents. Nothing. They had gone abroad to spend holidays in a different country. They never returned to assist me in any manner. The house belonged to me now, and its silence over me loomed higher than ever. I tried to brush it off. My own fear may be getting the best of me. I listened for something else, a mumbling, hammering of palms on wood. My hair stood on end. This was not a silly wind refraction. This was off. I looked over at my peephole in the door and no one was there. No one in the hall. No one in proximity. But scratching kept happening. It had moved to the walls, the sound of hands scratching against wood. I didn't have any idea what to attribute it to. My mind reeled, trying to take into account why. But the only reason that came up in my head was that I was no longer alone in this house. I grabbed a kitchen knife off the counter. It was all that kept me safe from what was outside. I had to get out. Sneaking around wasn't doing anything but making my heart beat faster. Tossing would only make its rate of speed higher. Sneaking was the only thing that would work. I crept silently out into the hallway, knife jammed hard into the hand of my palm, and every creak echoing in my head. The house was too silent. Silent, quiet. And that is when I noticed the front door ajar once more. This time no wind blown whatsoever. It just still hung ajar. I did not want to continue, but the rational side of my head was insisting that I needed to know. I had no clue what I was looking for when I stepped out onto the porch, but when I did, my stomach dropped. There at the boundary of the driveway where it still remained shaded was something, no, someone, just a few feet in front of me. I did not know how long we there hung out waiting, frozen in that stillness. My own heartbeat was booming so loudly that assuredly they would have heard the boom of my heart. The figure at once disappeared and disappeared into the shadows, as if they did not even exist. I stepped in, shut the door, and leaned against it, gasping for air, trying to make sense of what transpired. I didn't know if I dreamed it or if it occurred, but for having so done, some way, somehow, I knew what I was seeing. I did not sleep a wink last night. I could not. The slightest creak, the creaking of the board, the wind whispering, and I jumped. The house was hanging me in suspense. I could not move my head, could not believe my mind, own senses. Paranoia had taken over me and I knew that I was not safe. When I came out during sunrise, the sun right above my house was a joke. I did not know if I was dreaming or the previous night was some kind of surreal reality. But after venturing out and taking a glance around in the backyard, I discovered something that made ice blood run in my veins. There were two distinct, deep impressions on the front porch under our steps that we had just crossed that afternoon. Too large for me, and they weren't there yesterday. And I knew then, whatever was still out there hunting me. I could sense the quality of morning air around me, each step a tug in terms of effort. The prints behind me, some unnatural reminder that I hadn't been alone as I'd assumed. I dropped to a knee to take a closer look, but there was no doubt. Someone had walked through. No animal would leave an impression like this. The shape, the size, human. I didn't want to think about it at all, but I couldn't help myself. I'd go round and round in my head over and over again, thinking about the strange man at the back of the drive last night. Did they make those marks? Did they just hang around the house, lurking behind me when I was too scared to go out? I could sense the phone vibrating on my leg, reminding me of the real world. My parents finally called back. "Hope you're all right. We're good. Call us if you need us." Great. They were out living their life and I was stuck here by myself in a house that was no longer home. I didn't want to inform them about what happened. What would I say? "Hello, maybe somebody was in my house last night and now I'm crazy?" They would just assume that I was being queenish. And what can they do anyway? They're out of their time zone. I pushed the thought away, tried to relax. I shut the door for the second time and went back to my bedroom. But disagreeablenesses would not let me go. I tried to turn off ideas, TV, Facebook, anything not to extend my head into madness of thought. But it happened for the second time. It was something. A scrape across the floor below, a scratch from downstairs, low and slow. My stomach fell. I didn't want to get up and take a look, but I couldn't stay where I was either. The curiosity was killing me. I gripped the knife once more, palms drenched wet as I moved soundlessly down the stairs. Gotta be quiet. Gotta sneak up. The very absolute last thing in the whole world that I would ever even think about doing was wake up whatever or whoever was in the house that I was sleeping in. I was halfway up the stairs, bent over, each creak of the wooden steps beneath me booming out through the quiet like a motherfucking bolt of lightning. Scratching was getting louder, but tonight audible. Downstairs. I did not have time to think about this, went downstairs quietly. I knew my house. I knew the inside. But tonight, every corner and every shadow were the enemy. I had already crossed the door when I was in the kitchen. I looked inside and the lamp was off, but shadows splattered on the walls, crashing in odd ways. I didn't see anybody there at first, but I did later on. The fridge was open very wide, and it was moving inside. I edged closer, snarling, thick with anticipation, until I could follow its shape. It wasn't human, a packet of chips scraping the cupboard. But the longer I stared, the more peculiar it was. The sound was not chips. It was something intentional. I saw it. A figure leaning against the fridge looking for something. Black, too dark to discern any details. But in the way they moved, not human. Stooping over, their body writhing into curves that tied my stomach up in inside-out knots. I did not need to wait to find out what it was. I jumped off, dragging feet behind me along the floor as I shot back up the stairs, my head spinning, adrenaline coursing through my body like a tidal wave, destroying all else. I slammed the door shut for the second time, gasping for air, heaving chest. I did not know that it was going to occur. I was not tired or sleeping. Something in my house existed. I sat down at my computer and typed one final message to my parents, my hands shaking. Something's in the house. I did not know what else to say. I received no response. The novel emerged gradually. I was in aching lower back's time warp on the way, and there I simply did not want to emerge. I did not want to emerge into the world outside the room. I did not want to sit up in bed, but I could not remain in it forever. The house was no longer home but prison, and I wanted to escape from it. I had finally managed to muster the courage to go outside, maybe for some fresh air, to clear my head. But when I went out onto the porch, I felt it. That same feeling, like whatever was out in the night was just waiting for me. My skin crawled as I looked around me, but there was nothing. The road was empty. The street was still. I attempted to brush it off, but the feeling lingered. I took a breath, trying to still the hammering of my heart. But before I could turn once more for what was the umpteenth time around towards the house, there was a voice, soft as a breath, with an undercurrent of roughness that sent blood running icy. "Come inside." I was there, my breath stuck in my throat. There was. I'd spun slow around, but nothing. Straight street, nothing. I wasn't sure if my head was just tricking me or if something really was. But I didn't care. I didn't want to wait to see. I dashed back inside, shut the door, and slid down against it, my racing heart. I had no way of knowing how long I could keep doing this. I needed someone to tell me that I wasn't going crazy, that this actually was happening. But the problem was, no one was ever going to arrive. The clock ticked by. The sun went down once again. The house was fine. And then I heard it again for the second time. The knocks. And now there was more. They were no longer on the door. They were on the walls, the floorboards, as if everywhere. As if the house was alive and whatever lived within the house was trying to get me to hear them. I was there, frozen with fear, my head in a spin. I must stop this habit of this fixation. I couldn't be left alone in this house here. I heard something that I shouldn't have heard. The front door. It was opening again. And this time I didn't delay. I dashed to the window, yanked it open, and launched myself out into the yard. I didn't hate the shock of landing on grass. I hated the fact that I'd just escaped the devilment of it. And when I turned around to face it again, the house remained, scowling. And in my stomach, I knew that this wasn't finished. I didn't even blink when my parents drove away for the weekend. They'd driven off 1,000 times previously, and I was old enough to be left behind. But there was something about that one weekend from the beginning. It was either the atmosphere outside the house or that the house seemed so empty after they'd gone, but something was entering the house. I'm not even talking about the type of chill that the air is just too cold with the AC cranked. That wasn't it. Something was in the house with me that I couldn't figure out. As soon as they closed the door, I'd already eaten a sandwich, settled in on the couch, and had the Netflix started. I wasn't looking for anything more than an evening to myself, you know? Same routine every time. But just as I was all settled in to watch it, I just couldn't help myself. Any little sound would have me leaping out of my seat, like someone coming down the stairs or a car going by, though no one was going to be driving by to gawk at me. The wind was howling outside. It was screaming through the woods and whining and complaining about the house like whatever it was wandering around the place. I did my best to shut it down, but the more time that passed that I spent there, the louder it was. I had my phone ringing periodically for some of my friends' phone calls. Not anything out of the ordinary, just standard jokes and memes. But there was one that made me short-stop, one from my home alarm. It was odd, because I knew the alarm did ring and that the app always let me know whenever something occurred. Motion detected outside. I crept out from behind the window, but rain was coming down so hard that it was not even worth trying for me. I brushed it off for having thought that it was a cat or whatever. Perhaps a raccoon. My house was not out in the middle of nowhere, so strange things used to happen here all the time. But even then, I just couldn't help but feel this kind of feeling that something didn't feel right. I shrugged and resumed my TV show, trying to distract myself. But I couldn't. The minutes passed, pleasant as they were, and there was this feeling of being watched. I just could not quite put my finger on why, but in the room there was certainly this feeling of being watched. Occasionally I would glance around and there was nobody there. The silence was creepy. Outside, the storm was just something which could not be heard. And then I did. A knock. No knock on the door. Not that simple. This was what sounded like someone pounding on the living room window behind me. I stood tense. My heart was clamped up tight, and I moved stealthily round to glance at the blinded window. Of course, I couldn't see anything out there in the rain and dark, but I would have taken oath I heard it again. A tap. Light at first, and then firmer afterwards, as if someone trying to get my notice. I wasn't stupid enough to open the blinds or anything. I wasn't that type of person to be wandering around looking at the door either. I woke up, took whatever bat was handy by my bed, one of those things, and snuck on over to the living room. My hairs were prickling on the back of my neck as I crept towards the window. I wasn't dreaming. There was something there. I crept back behind the blinds, racing pulse in my chest, just far enough to peer through. Nothing. The sidewalk was deserted, rain slamming off the glass. And yet, despite this, I still couldn't resist doing it. Whoever or whatever was outside, they were near. I closed the window, double-locked the front door, and ran onto the couch. I should have gone crazy. Wait, beeps again. Motion detected outside. I did not even look outside this time. I closed the app and tried to calm down. It was my mind tricking it. Then lights swayed. They did it for a second and then they quit. That was it. The lights remained on, but something in them skittered along my skin. The entire house groaned and creaked like the house was shifting. The walls breathed and I winced at each tiny creak and groan. I caught a glance over at the clock. Midnight was just about there. How absurd you're so courageous as long as the sun shines, but the moment the sun sets, a whole different scene. I had taken out my mobile and was about to call my parents, but just as I was about to dial, I heard it. The knock. But this time, not on the window. This time from within. From upstairs. I was running. The stairs creaked and then steps, slipping along and at a slow pace, as though the individual was not in any hurry. I knew that I was not dreaming. Someone was upstairs in the house. I simply stood there in a paralyzing terror for what felt like an eternity, having no idea what to do. My phone was still clutched in my hand, but I didn't even think about calling my parents. I was so afraid that I didn't even have the nerve to make a noise. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I said not a word, just keeping silent. That silence was unusual, though. It wasn't serene. It was deadly. Like something was taking its breath and a breath for me to move. I just plain could not endure it anymore. I had clutched my bat tightly to my arms and crept upstairs, wheezing in vicious, spasm-like gasps. I kept reassuring myself again and again that I was a mad person. But whatever was crashing upstairs wasn't playing ball. The board creaking, the banging sound, it appeared that someone was trying to play subtle, but they were doing a very terrible job of that. I went up the top of the stairs and found all of the doors wide open, empty, vacant. But not that it wouldn't have been. The air thick. The hall longer than it would have been. I was in the hall, just past my parents' room, to mine. The door ajar, and then I saw something. The shadow. It was in my doorway. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't breathe, but I could feel it. The presence. It wasn't human. It shouldn't be in my house. The shadow didn't move for a moment, then started to move. Not quickly, but slowly. Slowly. Like looking at me. I was stood there creeping slowly backwards, never once looking around. I knew that if I did look back, then this terror would be on my back. I still held the bat, but I did not know if it would be of any use to me or not. I wanted one thing now. I wanted to be away from there, but the house would not let me go. I took slow breaths, attempting to still my racing heart, but it was not going to happen. The air was like something on me, something crawling toward the inside of me to my chest. I couldn't step into the doorway, but neither could I stay there day after day. My mind was a muddled string of thoughts. What was it? And how did it make its way into my home? I took 2 steps back further, the bat held in my fist, gazing out into the darkness. It didn't move. It simply sat there as if expecting me to take the first step. I couldn't do this. I couldn't just remain here forever. I took a step back and the floor creaked under my weight. That was when it shifted. It shifted quick. It sprang across the hallway into the blackness of the house. I did not stay behind. I ran out of the room, downstairs, and right to the door. The front door, though, would not open. I yanked on the handle, my gut twisting in terror, but it wouldn't budge. I could hear it, those footsteps, approaching. Same screeching sound, always. Closer and closer, and I was trapped. I turned around and headed toward the back door, but that was also locked. I staggered back into the living room, a foot or two past the coffee table, and mad-eyed scrounged through everything there for something, anything, that would perhaps be able to help me. The house was suffocating me, walls closing in step by step with every frantic breath of air that I managed to force into my lungs. The lights began flashing once more. Once, twice, then died out completely. The whole house was darkened. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but my mind was elsewhere. I tried to slug it out, attempting to flash the light, but my hands shook too furiously. I managed to switch it on at last, the dim beam of light piercing the darkness of the room. I could hear it now, gasp. Not me descending the stairs. That long, panted breath like sneering at a human being. It wasn't. It was not human. I could no longer stay in this house. I had to go. I sprinted for the back door once more, my flash beam shooting wildly across walls as I desperately searched for an exit. And that's when I noticed it, the shadow. It was deep down the hall, looking at me. I didn't pause. I didn't mind the noise, the danger, anything. I sprinted. I tore the back door off the hinges, my gasp trapped in my chest as I ran off into the yard. I could only hope to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. I didn't even bother looking back over my shoulder, but just ran until my legs screamed and my lungs were about to burst. When I finally did arrive at my old house, I was in the middle of the block gasping. I glanced back over my shoulder at the house, but there was just nothing. No shadow, no shape, anything. Like it never happened. I attempted to find sense in what had transpired, but sense was impossible. No sense to be had, no sense to make of it, no explanation of what had been seen, what had been witnessed to make sense. Then I could breathe again and I could call my parents. They were surprised, but they did not think that I was telling the truth. They thought that I was frightened, maybe angry. They told me that I would go and stay at a friend's house and come back early. I did not protest. No way was I going in there alone. We waited there until they returned. My dad even went as far as to visit the house the following day to see what was going on. He called me a little later, a few hours or so. Nothing. No break and enter to be found. No windows broken. No things thrown around furniture. The house just sat there, empty, like nothing ever even occurred. I never went back. Ever. My parents sold the house the next month and it was done. I went on with life, but I will never forget this evening. The monster in the hallway, the stairs, the breathing. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. But I've learned something. There are things that need to be left behind. There are memories that need to be left alone. And there are nights, no matter how old you become, that you have to never spend alone. It's just always this weird sense of being, you know. You're just there, but there's this weird silence, nobody's home, and the house just sits there waiting. That was how I was that night. It was going to be one of those relaxed kind of nights. My parents were away for the weekend and I was by myself. I wasn't tripping neither. It was Friday night and I just really wanted to just plosh my butt onto the couch, all Netflixed and chillin' and stuff. The house was actually so quiet. Only the hum of the fridge going vroom and one creak from the super old wood floor. I had some music going, just chillin', eating chips and browsing on my phone. It was all really normal, actually. But something was off that evening, though. I didn't think about it twice to start with. I might have been paranoid, you know? But the evening passed and stuff started getting weird. I was hearing these small noises, thudding or mumbling or something. But whenever I'd go to listen, there'd be nothing there. I kept telling myself that it was nothing. The house settling, maybe the wind. But the weird thing is, it didn't sound like that. It sounded like someone was in there, someone they shouldn't have had. I wrote it off though, you know what I'm talking about. When you're alone in your house, you hear things, and your mind tricks you. So I sat back down on the couch and left the TV on for white noise. But that's when it occurred. The lights did that strange flicker. Not a teeny blink. I'm describing dead-out flicker, as if they were going to totally die. I was just standing there staring up at the ceiling for a minute, wondering if I was dreaming I had seen it. But then it happened again. A full-on flicker, as if the entire house was going to die. All right, that's when I started freaking out slightly. I got up and walked over to the light switch and flipped it on and off a few times, hoping perhaps that the light bulb would go out or something was wrong with the electricity. But the lights remained on. No problem. I attempted just to ignore it, hoping that I was tired and dreaming. And I heard gentle tap, like on the door, like such a tap on the other side. Now I'm in less densely populated with tourists, and it was beyond my bedtime to rest for there to be anyone around. But I figured maybe it was one of the neighbors or something amiable welcoming me in to greet me. So I got up from bed and approached the door, looked through peephole. No one, just the dark yard outside. I stood there for a second, attempting to shake off the sickly sensation rising up my spine. It's just a knock, I told myself. A joke. But when I spun around, I heard the knock again. Louder, as if to warn me. I stood there. I'm not an idiot. I wasn't going to open that door unless I knew what was going on. I grabbed my phone and called my parents' number. They didn't answer. Perhaps they were out, or perhaps they had not answered their phone to ring them. I did leave an urgent message explaining the knocking and that it was driving me crazy. I then sat down on the couch once more and closed the door and attempted to psyche myself out into believing that it was nothing. But the knocks just would not cease. It was not a usual knock, it was relentless, in a manner where it is like someone is standing on the door attempting to deliver some form of message or whatever. Tap, 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 break, tap, tap, tap. It just continued and continued. It was making me rather angry. I was thinking of calling the police over the phone, then I think, maybe some kid's just joking with me? But no, it was not just that. Knocks persisted, and I thought that the one making the knocks was not going anywhere anytime soon. I looked through the peephole again. Nothing. Complete blackness. And then I saw something. Something little, but it sent chills down my spine. On my peephole on the doormat sat a little old-fashioned key. An old, busted-up, rusty key that didn't belong anywhere. The kind that I had never seen. I did not have someone who was going to leave something like that on my front door. I didn't touch it, I wasn't going to. I stepped back from the door and picked up the phone into my hand for the third time, calling 911 this third time. I didn't care if I sounded totally insane. I was not going to take the chance. My hands were shaking. The knocking stopped, but I could still feel something. Like fingernails, like scraping on the door. I leaned my back against the wall, waiting for the dispatcher to answer. My thoughts were in loops with 1,000 what-ifs. Perhaps it was a prank. Perhaps it was a troublemaker, or perhaps something else. I have no idea how long I waited, but when the dispatcher finally answered, I couldn't talk fast enough. Someone's pounding on my door. I don't know who it is, but they're not leaving. I think they're trying to get in. The dispatcher told me to stay on the phone and just wait for the police to show up. I could hardly hear their voices over the pounding of my own heart, but I was trying to stay calm. And after that, the world was having fun with me. The light started to blink again as well, but it did not blink. It ceased to exist. I was stuck. The house was dark as darkness itself. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight and threw it into the center of the room. It was darkening around me. I heard something scraped. Not tapping or knocking, but scraping. Something was scraping outside and I could hear it. And it stopped. I was shaken there, gasping and expecting something to occur. My phone was ringing at the police station, but I could not even shift from that place before I heard a huge bang somewhere in the back of the house. It was like the shutting of the door. I neared to tossing my phone with fright. I rushed towards the back door, but it was shut. I'd heard nothing inside the house, and I hadn't even registered that's what I was waiting for. Maybe I'd hoped that noise had gone by me then, but it hadn't. It had sounded like someone had been inside, and it was waiting for me. I couldn't breathe. I was rigid beside the back door, gasping, praying that something, anything, had some kind of opportunity to shift, to alert them to what was going on. The silence was horrible. That awful, smothering silence which reminds you the world has locked in suspended animation. You and it together. My flash phone never cut more than an inch into the darkness, but all the rooms in the house were claustrophobically sealed off in such suffocating darkness. I peered down the living room and hall expecting something just out of range, but there was nothing in sight there. Only me inhabited the house. At least, or so I believed. The second one sound that I could hear was creaking. Creaking slowly and quietly like footsteps tallying stairs up. Hair stood on the back of my neck. No way I was dreaming. Somebody was home. But how? I was the only one here. My chest was thudding with my heart. I just sat there and could not stand up. I used the nearest thing I had handy at the time, the baseball bat propped up against the doorway, to defend myself. Not that I necessarily had much of an idea how much good that would do if already inside. At least it gave me some sense of temporary control. I tiptoed over to the stairs, trying my best to tiptoe upstairs, my steps barely quiet on wooden steps that creaked with every step. Creepy sounds upstairs built with every step, a sensation of one moving and invisible. I climbed the stairs, fingers clenched around the railing so tightly that the knuckles ached. The air became thicker and colder, and I could hear the faintest whisper, as if the walls were speaking to me. "Is anyone here?" I huffed, attempting to keep my voice steady, but it trembled. No response was heard. Instead, I'd heard a thud. It had been slow and heavy, the sound of something heavy falling to the ground. My muscles tensed up. Whoever was above didn't want me to hear what they were doing. Knowing made my stomach turn over. I stepped a little closer, my own breathing barely louder than a whisper as I drew near the hall. There, at the far end of the hall, it was. Not on the wall, but on the floor next to the bedroom door. As if the person had leaned there, but not quite, hardly at all, slumped. After I knew what was happening, there arrived a bang audible behind the door. I stepped back to let fall the bat from my hands, pounding hard in my chest. I did not know what to do. Shall I leave? Shall I hide? I never ever felt so scared in my entire life. I breathed not, trying to make sense of it all. My pulse beat in my skull, the whispers now deafening, this surreal combination of breaths and incoherent murmurings all around me, the walls, the ceiling, the floor below me. There was no sense. And then I heard it. The soft opening of a door. My mind was screaming to go, to escape the house and never return. My legs weren't consenting, however. I was frozen. The door creaked on its hinges as it opened, and I saw something, or someone, standing in the darkness. It was a shape, but not a man. It was tall, much taller, and it was off. Its shape was not fixed, as if it were amorphous, changing in and out of shape. Its face, if one could call it that, was a blur of blacks and shattered lines, with eyes that burned like hot coals that appeared to burn holes in the black. It didn't speak. It created no voice except a low, unearthly growl. I was about to faint, but I was frozen. I couldn't take my eyes off of what this creature was. It swayed towards me slowly, its form bending with each movement, as if it weren't even present. And then it stopped. It just stood and glared at me. Time had been stalled for an instant. I was stalled in terror still. And then it happened. A flash of noise. The whispers increased to almost intolerable. The ceiling lights were flashing on and off, playing shaky shadows on the walls, twisting and curling. The man began to move towards me again quite rapidly. I swung the bat, barely able to see anything at all in the darkness, but my swing was wild and uncontrolled. I missed everything. I stepped back, but I couldn't take my eyes off the figure. It was moving towards me, and I was certain in myself that I would not be able to get away from it. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The room was quiet. Whispering stopped. The lights flickered back into their usual pattern. I stood there for what felt like an eternity with bat at the ready, wondering if I'd dreamed the whole thing, or had barely escaped some awful something by the skin of my teeth. I do not know for how long I simply stood there in that hallway, attempting to convince myself that it was all just a dream. But before I could leave, I noticed something else. On the floor by the door of the guest room was an old small key, the same one that I had just seen a few seconds prior. I was halted with a shiver of blood. That door key. It was right there the entire time in front of me, and whoever or whatever entered my home knew perfectly well what it was. The knocking, the lights, the whispering, the shadow, all of them now added up. And I had only just started to realize that the house was no longer vacant. Whatever it was constructed of, had been there a long, long time before I ever stepped foot in the building. I never slept at that house. I couldn't do it. I picked up my phone and sprinted out of the house to my car and drove to someone's friend's house in a straight shot. I do not know what the rest did afterward, but this is definite. The house was never quite the same afterward. Neither was I. It was a typical Saturday night. I'd just closed the shop for the evening at a local pub, and I was going to call it a day after a day's work. I was looking forward to a peaceful drive home. No traffic, no hassle, just the thumping of the wheels on the freeway. I got there at 11:30, switched off the engine of my vehicle, and drove my usual car home. I was quite out of town, and alone on such deserted roads was no new thing to me. I'm not one of them people who scare easily, though. I'd had my share of bad zones and cruising around late at night in the wee hours before, but there was something about this specific evening just didn't feel right. Or maybe it was the cold that had crept into the air, or that the sky was this weird brightness, but it was one of those nights where the silence creeped you out. You know what I mean? Anyway, I was driving along this completely long, deserted stretch of road. The kind where the next car would overtake you in 20 minutes, tops. No houses, no streetlights, just trees on either side fading off into the darkness. I turned up the music quite loud, trying to shake some of the stress. The rumble of the engine was too overpowering in the quiet, but I didn't mind. And then, suddenly, my headlights dropped upon something on the road before me. Something coalescing out of the edge of my eye, a flicker. I hadn't even seen it to begin with. It would have been something that had flashed from some animal, some sheen off the trees. But closing in, I caught sight of the form of a man, standing beside the roadside. I braked, scowling, so that I could take a look. The fellow was hooded too, and stood staring at me, not an inch of him yielding. I had assumed he was waiting for a ride or lost, but when I approached, something odd caught my eye. It didn't shift. It didn't even blink. I might have kept going, but something wasn't right. Perhaps because they were so strict. I mean, who gets strict on the side of the road this late at night? Something wasn't right. So I pulled over, rolled down the window, and screamed. "You need help or something?" Nothing. I waited a second and screamed again. "You all right?" Nothing at all. By then, my instincts were saying this was not a lost person that needed to be picked up. My heart started pounding. I looked around. No other vehicle around. No streetlights. Just wind blowing through the trees way in the distance. The man suddenly came forward, but not in the usual way. He was suspended, moving toward my vehicle without ever touching the ground. My breath was lodged in my throat. I could see the face, pale white, with eyes wide and staring at me, but never ever blinking. Being stared at made my backbone prickle. "Hello, what do you want?" I snarled, involuntarily backing up. He spoke not a word. He just kept coming now at an even faster rate. He was sliding, actually gliding, that odd, unnatural manner. My fists were clenched on the steering wheel, my head reeling. Do I hit him? Do I get out? But no sooner had I made up my mind to drive away than the man started running towards my car, pounding on the glass with fists. Pounding their fists against the glass made such a racket that I could feel it ringing in my ears. I stomped my heel to the floor, tires squealing in protest as I sped away from the figure, my heart pounding against the walls of my chest. I didn't take a risk by not glancing over my shoulder. I couldn't. I tried only to get as far away from that man as I could. Then I recalled having discarded it, something was not right. My backseat mirror picked up a dark presence moving completely wild, heading towards my car. I looked at the speedometer. I was traveling at 70 miles per hour, and this horror was still coming for me. My blood froze. I have no idea how long. Minutes? Hours? Swear forever. At whatever speed I was driving, the figure remained stuck on my tail, never changing its speed. I made one corner too fast, trying to get rid of them, and when I looked again in the rear window, they were covering me, closer than they had been, but that's when I saw something that nearly made me furious. They weren't running. They were walking along with me, side by side at the same rate, never breaking stride, like some kind of freak ghost. I could feel the sweat trickling down the back of my neck, shaking hands on the steering wheel. The terror was asphyxiating, but I was not going to let go. I was not going to give the beast, whatever it was, the best I could give. The man disappeared from view behind the rearview mirror in an instant. I'm telling you, I almost lost it there. I was losing it as if I was crazy, but when I took another turn, this one onto more familiar ground, the same guy again was there. This time, right in the middle of the road. I have no idea how it did. How did it go there so fast? I didn't tally. I braked hard and spun the car to the side, my heart pounding. When I looked over my shoulder, the figure was gone. I didn't get far past that until I was back at my driveway, my car just suddenly stopping. I jumped out of it, shutting the doors, too afraid even to look around. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there awake and glaring, trying to put sense into this in my mind, wondering if I actually did succeed in escaping whatever that was. Even today, still, I am my same self. Still walk the same down the same streets. But no matter which way I end up going when I do so, I catch the same. A tension growing, the feeling something it was, something that occurred on that night. Perhaps waits patiently, off to the side, around some corner. I couldn't shake this sensation out of my head. Days passed and I still would look over my shoulder while driving, still fixated in my own head with this reminder of these steps. Even each time that I drove down some recognizable street, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Even driving past that place where I had seen the creature gave me the chills. A week or so after that, I was being driven along the same road in the afternoon. I was seeing a friend who lived on the other side of town and there was no other route. I attempted to convince myself it was my imagination. Whatever it was the night before must have been some kind of psychological illusion. Nothing else. But when I did show up at that desolate section of road, the same fear silently crept back into my heart. The air was thick with silence, as if waiting with held breath for something to happen. I attempted to psych myself out of it, thinking I was paranoid. But I was not that stupid. I could not get this feeling out of my head. Something had stalked me that night, and it was not even close to being finished. The path went on, and I was running to the very same place where I had already seen that figure. Trees closing in on me, big bodies towering over me and creaking as if attempting to push me aside. The same eerie stillness, the same pressure in my chest, and I noticed him. On the sidewalk in the street stood the same man. Hood was aghast, mask on face, not so much as flinching. I was standing immobile in the place that I was at. My heart skipped a beat. But this time it was different. This time it was different because there was someone with the figure there. There were other individuals. They were black shapes in the very back, unseeable, black figures in front of the blackness of the trees. My stomach was screaming at the top of its lungs at the top of my head to get out as quickly as I could in my car from it. But I was unable to move because I was afraid. I thought I could just keep my eyes on the road and just hope they'd vanish like they did last time. But suddenly, Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of movement. The figure started walking towards my vehicle. At first, slow, but getting faster with each step until it was running full speed towards me. That's when I lost it. I floored the gas pedal, tires squealing as I took off ahead, eyes glued to the rearview mirror. For an instant, I was thinking that perhaps I had escaped. I caught sight of the face in the mirror. It was behind me. No, it was running, faster than any man on foot could go. Faster than anything that breathes could ever move. It was behind me, approaching at a sickening pace. My hands trembled with me as I gripped the steering wheel. I glanced over my shoulder once again, attempting to push it aside, but no matter how often I glanced over my shoulder, it was behind. Approaching. Always approaching. I didn't know how I was managing to walk on 2 feet. The room in front of me grew dark, breathing, huffing air in sudden spastic gasps. I circled around, but I knew this one thing: I couldn't be stopped. And then, without warning, something did happen, and a chill ran down my spine. My headlights came on unexpectedly, and a darkness like coal was directly in front of me. The car skidded to a stop in its step, the engine stuttering so that it was going to leave me stranded on the road. I looked up just in time to see the figure running into the headlights. It was no longer a figure. It was many shapes, all of which were a pack, all of which were racing towards me in symphonic unity. The engine spluttered. My stomach bottomed out as the car spun over onto the sidewalk. There was nothing. Then there was scritching started. It sounded like scratching chalk on nails, but it wasn't on the outside. It was inside, in my head. I could hear it all day, all night, like a hand would rub against the glass, scratching the surface just hard enough that I could feel every beat of a second of it. I peered out of the window, and there they were, those bodies just on the periphery of the beam of light off my headlights, their faces vacant, smooth, featureless skin stretched tight over bony heads. No eyes, no lips, skin. It stretched one of them out, tracing its fingers along the glass. I could hear it now, closer than ever, the scratching louder, as if it was attempting to break through. I couldn't get up. I couldn't breathe. I was stuck, sitting there, and I have no idea how in the world I was ever going to get out of them. I thought I would jump out of the truck and run, but there wasn't any chance in hell that I was ever going to get away from them. There wasn't any way that I was ever going to get away from them. The hooded form, the one who had started all of this, rounded to the driver's side of the window. I could see its hand just above the glass, curled fingers and long, as if they weren't human themselves. It tapped at the glass, and for the very first time ever that I'd ever seen it, it spoke. "Get out." That wasn't a voice. It had been a sensation. An ice shard of a knife that had sliced right through the center of me and branded my skin. I'd been frozen. I couldn't breathe. I'd have been brain dead, stuck in terror. And then, to retract what had been done, the figure stepped back. It was no longer alone. The rest advanced, palms against my car windows, and they were all looking at me, not with eyes, but with the same hollow stare that paralyzed my very soul. I don't know how long I had sat there numb before I could shake my wits. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the keys, and screaming like a madman, I turned over the engine the second time. The engine coughed and roared to life, and once more I jammed down on the gas pedal, speeding down the street without even a glance back into the rearview mirror. I hadn't been slowing down until I got to my front door, and even that couldn't shake the feeling. I wasn't alone anymore. I still felt them behind me, coming after me, though now I couldn't see them anymore. It's been weeks now. I no longer drive past that street. And when I close my eyes, they seem before me, those white faces, those vacant, hollow eyes watching back at me, as though they wait for the moment I'll have to venture out once again. But this much I know. I don't think they'll ever leave me in peace. It was the kind of evening. You do get the type you don't get, and for some reason or another you just can't quite put your finger on just what that is. There had been a big, stifling, suffocating feel with an oppressive mood, as though something was going to occur, as though the sky was electrocuted and not the air. I was driving by myself, but alone as usual. On the highway I'd driven 1,000 times. There was barely anyone on the road. It was late. Too late for anyone, but too early for everyone. Driving late at night does something to a person. A drive job done at midnight does that to a person. I knew the route. Too well, in fact. But tonight something was not right to me. The highway was empty. No other vehicles behind me. No vehicle in front of me either. The highway had been empty as a whole, it appeared. I did not like being alone in normal hours. I liked being alone. I did not hate the silence. But tonight, something was a little wrong. Waved it off. Told myself that it was my brain being stupid. Was probably the tiredness. My beams cut through the blackness in front of me, illuminating the road, and my tires on the road were all I was hearing. No music. I had already turned it off before when my ringing head was overriding the music. I did not enjoy the silence. It caused me to think and think more. About work, about life, about everything. It was a day that was long, a longer night. But nothing could get me ready for what lay ahead. I was on the highway and traveling somewhere. I thought I noticed something in the distance. I kept thinking my mind was playing tricks on me at first. The further I approached it, the more probable it seemed it really existed, however. A human being, a form, an individual in the road, alone. It wasn't a crashed car, no, but a form in the shadows. No streetlights, no sign of anything else. I was going to drive around it, but something that I couldn't see stopped me. Something that I couldn't see shoved me around and told me to turn and look over my shoulder. Maybe it was the thrill of driving around day after day. Maybe it was the eerily foreboding quality the night itself had. But I did stop. The passenger never budged. Didn't even realize I pulled up behind him. I rolled down my window. "Hello, are you all right?" I asked, attempting to be quiet. I wasn't accustomed to pulling over, but tonight I couldn't drive on. No clue. Just the guy who was there. His head hung down forward as though I did not exist. He was a man, likely late 20s, wearing black clothes, but that is all I could see. I could not get a view of his face in focus, and that is when the hair on the back of my neck rose. Something was not quite right about the whole thing. I did not know what, but I knew it in my stomach. The wind was too still, the night too quiet. I waited for him to say something or react, but nothing. Not even a blink. It was like staring at a wall, and the more I stared at him, the longer I kept getting this thing that I'm doing something wrong. That I'm there. I should have left. I should just have stayed oblivious to that guy. But then, before I'd even gotten to the point of deciding if I was going to make up my mind or not, he shifted. Tentatively. Awfully slowly, as if in some kind of trance. The movement was wooden, rigid, and then I did look. His face. I was looking at it finally, a little in the dark. It wasn't right. There was something the matter with it. His eyes were too wide open, and his mouth. His mouth did not change when he opened his mouth. It stayed like that silly, rigid smile, like smiling but not. I didn't know what to say, to think. The words wouldn't gather. So I just sat and looked at him. My initial reaction was to get the devil out of here, but I sat where I was, and he came closer and closer, in silence. And then it shifted. The silence was crushing, pressurized. My vehicle just sat there, motor running, headlights blazing, and I felt nothing. Not even the thrum of the tires on the road anymore. Footsteps of the man were louder than they might have been if I'd been sitting in my car quietly, as if I could hear them pounding across the highway. I swear on the name of God, that is when I realized something was wrong. Swear I could have sworn I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye in the rear view. Not behind me, just some sort of movement in the mirror. Something, or someone. I looked over at the dude ahead of me, and that is when it struck me. I had been driving for a couple of hours and I was totally alone. So who in the devil's name was behind my back view mirror? The tail light in the rear view caught my attention again. It was not a reflection, it was moving, bobbing up and down to the beam. I turned my head around to glance over my shoulder, but the road behind me was as bare as it had been when I'd pulled over the first time. My heart began to pound. That sensation of being observed struck me directly in the middle of my chest. I couldn't let it get away. I glanced at the man who continued to stand. His stance had not altered. He was not departing, but I could sense his gaze on me. Though I could no longer view them so clearly, I was aware that they were piercing mine. Something about him simply didn't quite fit. I should have made a charge at it in my truck and floored it. I should have peeled out of there without delay, but somehow, I simply didn't. I tentatively reached out for the gear shift, shaky fingers to clutch it, but before my hand could even acquire a grip on it, the man shifted again. Wide eyes. He was right in front of me, close enough for me to take in all the details. His face still looked strange, alien. His smile on his face turned into a snarl. It was too wide. His teeth were teeth like they would be on animals, jagged and worn down. His skin was white, oilier or less pockmarked white, and his hair was greased back flat, like he hadn't showered in weeks. And his mouth. It opened, wide, but not a human mouth. It widened to impossible width, and I could see the back of his throat, black coal, as if there were no shadows whatever behind the lips. That was when I heard it. A voice. Not his. It was coming from everywhere. It was echoing in my mind, a whisper at first, as if it were trying to penetrate my brain. Get out now. I had read the warning, yet I didn't understand. Why? How? My body was frozen, stuck to the seat, unable to budge. I wanted to turn my head, I wanted to punch it and leave. But whatever had taken over me had frozen my body, and then out of the corner of my eye I saw it again. The flash in the rearview mirror. I didn't think this time. I turned my head to see. There was someone there. No, not someone. There were things. They were bobbing in and out of view just behind my vehicle. Figures, shapes. Dark, shadowy shapes with fuzzy outlines, their motion jerky, unnatural, as though they were flipping in and out of existence. They were getting nearer. I turned my head from the man on the street, and I was in my first fear. He was not walking. He was staggering toward me, rigid at first, then jerking, his legs stiffening with each step. He had others with him. Shadows were among them. They were creeping, moving inward along a circle about my car. I must leave, I must get out, but I did not like to reply. The man flung open my window, knocking on it with his fist. I leapt halfway out of my own skin. His fist was locked. Bony fingers splayed across the pane. I felt the scritch of his nails on the glass, as if his nails were tough enough to scar the glass panes like pieces of tissue paper. And then, of course, the voices in my head. The voices returned. Louder. More urgently now. Stay with us. Don't go away. I couldn't bear it. A horror took hold of me. I rammed my accelerator pedal as far as it would go, all the way to the floorboard of the car, and I battled the car into a mad canter. The engine roared, and my tires roared as I careened down the empty road, racing faster than I ever had in my life. But regardless of how hard I floored the gas pedal, these shadows, followed me. I could always catch a glimpse of them swaying in rearview mirrors. They drifted. They moved along roadside borders as though lagging behind in pursuit. I never did look back. I just tried to get my eyes on the road in front of me with the aim of escaping from this horror. The roar of the engine, the whine of wind on my cheeks, the shriek of burning wheels is all dampened by the thud in my chest. But when I did look back over my shoulder for that one split second of doubt, and my heart shut down, the man, that bent figure, was standing in the street now, arms out as if to wait for me. His face had changed again, and his smile, good God, his smile, was as broad as the universe. And as I knew I was going to destroy it, the road just lay out in front of me into blinding light, just like the road split in two, and beyond the light, the everyday world, the sane world, the one where there weren't any shadows and monsters. I floored it and shot into the light, hoping it would be quick enough to leave everything behind. When I emerged from the other side, all was silent. The man, the figures, gone. I looked around, still rubbing my hands on the wheel. I continued driving, the road now emptier than ever before. No sign of anything out of the ordinary, no shadows, no grotesque figures. I couldn't speak so long. I simply sat there, eyes straight ahead, trying to make it a dream. Maybe I had just been so exhausted, so angry at all those hours driving down the road. I eased back, tried to breathe, and then my rearview mirror hit me again. There in that moment was something there, a presence, a shadow. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't finished. It would never be finished. I don't know how I got here, but to hell with it. Maybe curiosity, bad timing, and stupid luck. The sort that you do not wish to have had when you are near death and weighing the demon how you ended up here. It began on a typical Tuesday night. I was working overtime. Nothing unusual, just business as usual. I'd had a terrible day, and I didn't want to concentrate, so I was mindlessly clicking through houses on a website for houses. I wasn't actually surfing to buy something or anything like that. I was just mindlessly surfing what was out there, and then I saw it. A sale house on Willow Street. How much? Ridiculously so that I find myself questioning if, along the way, maybe there was necessarily some kind of hook. Some of those worn-out old wrecks, the ones you see by the top set of steps halfway through the horror movies when the roof caves in and the paint seems to blister, as if it were a couple of centuries old. But something in the picture touched me. Something that compelled me to go and see it for myself. I went one step further and clicked on the ad, looked over the next one. Old Victorian house, Willow Street, in need of restoration, good for someone with vision. Price, $25,000. That's when I should have been smart. That price? People don't put houses like that up for sale unless there is something wrong with it. But I wasn't. I called immediately using the phone number listed. The guy who responded to me was weird, although I wasn't as alert. Informed me that his name was Tom. Told me that I had to report to him in 2 hours. Was so caught up in how huge a project this building would be. Had no idea that life was going to become hell on earth for me, where I would never wake up. I zipped up my coat, stepped out, and walked to Willow Street. It was near where I was lodging, but I'm sure the whole atmosphere that surrounded that part of the city was shady the instant I turned onto the street. Already shadowy, the sky was dark purple, and street lamps leaned in one direction. The homes on the block were all a few decades old, like the houses had been stored in the refrigerator for decades. None of them looked like they were in their youth. Chills ran down into my breast. When I walked up to the house, it just kept getting worse and worse. It was old. Not old building kind of pretty old, but old the kind of way something ought to have been torn apart 100 years ago. Broken windows, hinges holding the front door shut. Whoever owner, or rather still owner, didn't care one whit. I drove up to the front and spotted Tom on the porch. Older, lanky, probably his 50s or 60s. Thin flannel shirt and loose-fitting jeans. Wrinkles you only earn if your life's been tough. "Hey," I said, getting out of the car. "You selling this house?" He sized me up and down, apparently doing a return on investment assessment of whether I was the kind of human one would ever take the time to sit down with and talk. "You buying?" he said in a tone that made me question if the man had had a real conversation in decades. "Yeah, I've heard it on the net," I said, trying to sound brasher than I was. "I'm interested, but I mean, man, this house, it hasn't been doing that good in a while now." Tom provided a half smile, but there was nothing funny about it. "You're right, it's an old one, older than you'd care to know." He moved over to the side and gestured for me to enter. "Come on in, I'll give you the grand tour." I avoided it. The entire experience just didn't feel right, but I ignored it. I was grown up, for crying out loud. I could take care of myself. Either way, I had my money, and if the club really was as bad as they appeared to be, it was a bloody steal. The building, once I did manage to get inside, was uglier than I ever imagined. The floor creaked under me, dry and dust air scented. the smell that clings to something for 10 years warehoused. It had dust on everything it was covering its surfaces, creases where it hadn't been, and a few I didn't recognize. It was so dark in there I couldn't see any better, getting some resemblance of things anywhere. There was only the faint light bulb hanging from the ceiling. "Would you flip that one on?" I said, pointing to a hall light. "Don't go out of your way," Tom continued stubbornly. "Light's been out years." I frowned. "Right." I carried it along the corridor, and I have no idea why or how each step sounded hollow in this emptiness. Infinites of rooms of open doors so that I could see black beyond them. I didn't then understand it, but I do now. I looked at them. What wasn't? Tom just kept talking and talking about the building's history, and I wasn't listening. I was too busy doing an eye around the rooms, trying to make sense of it all. But nothing made sense. And the stairs. Wood that splintered and was sanded to the texture of 1,000 stairs, of the kind that creaks by ever so slightly when you put your weight on it. I lifted my head, and there was something on the edge of my vision. For a moment, I thought that it was the way light moved across walls, but no, there was more. A presence, a shadow, creeping, though hesitantly. I stood there, walled in. My heart fell behind. Tom did not blink or break pace. "You'll have to go for the high levels," he told me, at a lengthening distance and a slowly diminishing volume. "That's where the tower's best. That's the best part." I should have been facing the other direction at that moment, but I wasn't. I followed him up the stairs step for step, and I listened. I heard something. A whisper. So soft that for a moment I knew I was dreaming, and then I heard it again. Soft, whispery sounds, like whoever is trying to speak to you got the words all knotted. I was scared now. I had a clammy grip on my hands, and the hairs at the back of my neck were bristled. But I just went on and trailed behind. I did not need to be scared of Tom. He did that creepy thing with me like he just waited for me to stay curious. Like he waited for me to stay curious. Tom stood at the head of the stairs and halted before a door. "This is it," he breathed, opening the door very slowly. There was space there, yes, but it was not any space. It was dark, almost airless, air heavy with dust. There were these strange marks on the walls, deep scratch marks like something had scratched against the plaster. There was a broken window, and the moonlight streamed in through the broken glass, casting strange shadows on the floor. I wasn't going in, but Tom went in and cursed at me. "You won't believe it, this building's got something special, has character." I dangled there staring into the room. Something was off. The whispering grew stronger now, coming from inside that room. I don't know how to explain this, but the air in there was quivering, spinning around me, pulling me towards it. I breathed and went in. The instant I entered that house, the room chilled. Cold was elsewhere in the house, invigorating as filtered through walls. Whispering was louder, as if 1,000 mouths were whispering things to one another, distant and muffled but real. My skin crawled. I should have gone and run. Something stayed me, however, as if attracted by some force beyond control to the room. Tom himself wasn't responding. He was just standing there over by the corner, staring at the ground, his back to me. I had this crazy impulse to get up and walk over and check out what had his attention, but I didn't. My entire body was yelling inside my head at me to stay back, but my body wouldn't listen. "Tom," I stammered, shaking with my voice. What's happening here? Why is this place so wrong?" He did not glance. His voice was drawn out and rehearsed as if he'd uttered it 100 times. "It's the house. It has its own law with people, to communicate with them." I could hear thump-thump, my pounding heart battering the wall of my chest. I must escape, but I couldn't. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Tom's voice was distant, as if he'd shouted in a tunnel. I hadn't been looking at him first off, but I had caught something out of the corner of my eye moving. A shadow, darting across the floor so fast that I couldn't even get it into focus. I moved my head where it was, but the shadow was nothing, merged into the one in the corner. No. I breathed. What in the world was that? It was Tom who had lost it, just kind of gazed over at me. Blank, empty face. His eyes wide open, but not because he was afraid. More because he'd looked too long and just couldn't anymore remember how. It's been everywhere. The house, the haunts, they creep into your head. They make you see things they see. I couldn't catch my breath. Choking walls were extending to capture me. Cold fell harder now, air thick and heavy like I was strangling on air. Whispers were stronger, louder, and more distinct, and louder, and stronger, and then I heard actual words. Get out. Leave now. Don't stay. I retreated. And then suddenly I heard the door close behind me. I was turning around, my heart pounding with fright. No door. It had vanished. Poof. The walls were shifting. The house was shifting. The room was lengthening, curving, like the room itself was being stretched in two directions. Tom never moved back from there. He simply stood there, this empty, far-off expression on his face. And then, as if he was questioning my mind or something, he told me, "It's too late for you. You shouldn't have come here." I felt this rush of such panic that I almost fell. What do I mean? What in the world is going on? His lip curled into a smile that was anything but reassuring. You'll see. Light winks on and off, and darkness. Nothing, for an instant. Then a sound. A splintering, ice-shattering howl erupted at the rear of the room. Someone was there. I pushed back, attempting to create space between us, but the room was still present to stretch and contort. The air was thick, as if I was breathing dust. The whisper turned into a scream. This is when I saw it. Something thrust to the forefront from out of darkness. Twisted and grotesque, its form stretched out and its flesh something akin to torn flesh. Grinning, rotting skull if you can even refer to it as such. Eyes gone hollow as it stared at me directly. Evilly clawed hand extended way up to me. My body would not budge, rigid with cold terror. The creature was moving closer, its deformed fingers closing over me. I was attempting to scream, but the sound would not escape, and I awoke. A shiver against my shoulder. I turned around, and Tom was standing in front of me. But this was not Tom. His face twisted, his eyes black holes like the monster in front of me. You're one of them now. Tom's voice came, low and guttural. The house has claimed you. It always does. Everything about me suddenly lay shrouded in ice. The room, the walls, the floor, all were cold as ice. The black figure began bobbing its head towards me, and I knew. I was no longer in the room. I was somewhere else. Elsewhere. Darkness. Thick, warm air and pungent smell filled all around. I tried to scream, but nothing was issuing from my mouth. The monster had claws for hands that covered me, and I was in darkness. I was on my back in my car. My muscles were tense with my body knotted up, head disoriented. I was panicked, couldn't breathe, and aching in the chest. I was standing outside my home. The sun was breaking into pieces during the incident, lighting up the horizon. I shook my head, trying to clear the dizziness. Had it all been a dream? No way. It felt too real. My body ached like I'd been through something, like I'd been somewhere else. I quickly looked around. The house was still there, standing tall in front of me. The windows dark, the door ajar, but something beyond that. There was substance to it with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The whispering ceased, but still I had it in the marrow of me. Like the house still lingered, waited for me to come back. I didn't even glance back behind me. I downshifted and took off quick, not slowing up until I was some ways from there. I never returned to Willow Street. I still don't know who and what Tom really was, and I don't have a certain sure as hell idea what was in the house. But I do know one certain sure thing. It's something no one ought to be messing around with. So if you ever do get to hear about them having had a house on Willow Street sometime in the future, just forget racing over there to see what's going on. Trust me, you don't want to know what's going on inside. because whatever it is, it'll be in your head too. I'd leased a flat in the complex back in September, when the heat of summertime had begun to break. It was no first-class setup, peeling paint, 2 shattered lights on the hallways. But it was affordable rent, and I was not precisely a choice candidate. I just wanted some isolation, a fresh beginning, and some place where no one knew mine. My new neighbor had lived directly across the hall. I saw him on day 2. Tall, wiry man, mid-teens of being 40, greasy black hair, sunken eyes, filthy bathrobe, standing in his doorway, glaring at me, digging through my moving boxes. He glared at me but didn't say anything. I waved at him, but he didn't wave back. Just glared with little mouth gaping open as if he'd forgotten how to close it. That was the first warning sign. I should have heeded it, but I didn't. Humans are peculiar, at least where I live. A few days later, I began to hear bizarre sounds in his apartment. Not usual sounds, no television, no radio, nothing like that. Just movement. Furniture scraping against the floor at midnight, like he was reorganizing. Clomping, heavy footsteps pacing back and forth. Occasionally, they really did sound like they were whispering. Not talking, whispering. Like he was on the wall, whispering to himself, or to somebody. I never quite did succeed in hearing any other voice. I woke one night 2 a.m. to something that hit my stomach to the floor. A knock. Not at his door, not at mine, but on the walls. 3 slow, even beats. Then nothing. Then 3 again. It was rhythm, deliberate. I was in bed, frozen, my heart beating so hard in my ears that I could hear it. I was awake. I knocked on the back of the wall. The knocking ceased at once. The resulting silence was heavy, damp. Then, from the other side, a scratching struggle, as if nails were being pulled down the wall. I was ill. I slept not at all that night. The next day I passed by his door on my way out. His was open, barely, enough to look in. The apartment was nearly empty. No furniture, no decorations, nothing but a mattress on the floor and piles of newspapers along the walls. The building had a wet smell and something else, something awful. I scurried out of the hallway and out the door, resolved to start looking for a new place immediately. But it was worse that evening. I was lying in bed, eyelids heavy, half asleep, when I heard something give me the heebie-jeebies. Breathing. Not me breathing. Another guy breathing. Outside my room. Deep, whistling breathing like some grimy-looking fella. I woke up with a racing pulse, glaring at the door. The breathing just went right on being smooth and quiet. I crawled over and retrieved the baseball bat that I'd had on either side of my bed and scooted on over to the peephole. I did not wish to look. Every cell of my body moaned at me not to. But I did. And he was standing directly in front of the door, too close, far too close. His face near the door, pale and oily with perspiration, eyes bulging and fixed on something in the distance. His mouth moving, talking something incomprehensible, his hands spasmodically jerking at his sides, curling and uncurling. And then he barricaded himself inside and smiled, a clumsy, unwilling smile that was too big, like his skin was not exactly trimmed to his face. I stepped back, my breath trapped in my throat. The doorknob rattled. He was attempting to enter. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed my phone and called 911 and ran over to the window in case I needed to make a fast exit. The dispatcher picked up, but before I could even say hello, knocking started again, slowing down, on purpose. 3 knocks, and then nothing. Police arrived after he was gone. The hall was vacant. But on my door, something lingered. A note, in trembling, uneven script. You let me in. Now I live here too. I ran away the next day. But running away wasn't enough. The first night in my new house, a tiny studio on the other side of town, I convinced myself that it was finished. I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, and sat on the couch watching TV with the TV blaring loud as white noise. All was well. Until 3 a.m. Knock, knock, knock. I sat up with a jolt, my throat constricting. It was feeble but unmistakable. Not on my door, not on the walls. This time, in my closet. I clutched the bat, my heart thudding in my ears. I compelled myself to stand up, to go ahead and fling the closet door wide open. Nothing. Empty. My belongings, fresh paint, and the barest hint of something familiar. Something wrong. I did not rest well that night. I returned the next day to the apartment building. I had questions, but when I arrived, cold in the veins, the door to the neighboring apartment, his apartment, open. The apartment was vacant, no bed, no documents, bare walls, and a thick dust coat. I went in search of the landlord and asked him if he had any idea what became of the man who'd been living there. He paled. That apartment's been vacant for years. I didn't debate with him. I didn't challenge him. I simply turned and left. I left the lights on after I turned them off that evening. I did not hear any knocking, though, and did not sleep all that well. And when I woke up in the morning, there was once again a note on my kitchen counter. Same shaky handwriting, same slanted letters. You let me in. Now I live here too. The note pestered me. I wanted to justify it. Perhaps I was sleepwalking. Perhaps unconsciously I had written it to myself. However, within myself, I knew what it was. The knocking never ceased. Every night at 3 a.m. it persisted. Some nights the closet, some nights the walls. But worst of all, sometimes right next to my bed. I began sleeping less, staying awake, waiting. But nothing was ever spotted. Only the messages, each day, another. You can't leave me behind. I live inside you now. Stop looking for me. I slept not, ate not, saw him in mirrors, shadows, at the edges of my eyes. Wherever I discovered myself, I could sense him hovering in the background, observing. It was as if I was never alone, never would be. And then, one night, I awoke, not to the banging, but to the breathing, beside me. I rolled over, and he was there. Too close to. Not possible, could not be, wasn't. And he smiled. I screamed, and the world went black. I awoke to finding myself in the hospital. My landlord had discovered me passed out in my apartment. They explained that I had suffered extreme dehydration and fatigue. But I knew the truth. There was another note waiting for me at home. I live here too, forever. I don't sleep anymore, because I know that if I do, he'll be there. And one night, when I least expect it, I won't wake up at all.